Welcome back, everybody. Thank goodness this is the Arctic and not France. If it were France, people would be lounging around in the cafes and bars outside thinking, oh, I'll give him another half an hour before I can be bothered to go back in. But here, we are disciplined with our time management, and I thank you for it. So everybody who is making their way in, feel free to come and find yourself a comfortable seat. And we will begin again with our afternoon session. We're devoting this afternoon to resilient Arctic communities. This morning we heard from fascinating panelists who brought experience from national government. They brought experience from academia, from science, research, big business, technology. And we had a sort of big picture view of the state of the Arctic. And then we focused particularly on technology, education, and how that can be boosted to help the Arctic in its future development, sustainable future development. Right now, we're going to drill down into what this means for Arctic communities, how their future can best be safeguarded, and the people of the Arctic given everything that they need in terms of economic opportunity and a sustainable future in the place they love. So, we're going to be thinking about, obviously, economic development. We're going to be thinking about the impacts of climate change on communities. We're going to be thinking about something that came up earlier, the demographic challenge that faces so many Arctic communities. We've got speakers from different places bringing different perspectives. I'm excited to hear from many of them coming, in some cases, from very far away to talk about their perspective on the future of Arctic communities. Interestingly, we're actually going to begin, our first keynote remarks are going to come from a politician who actually is not from an Arctic nation, but from a nation that I think feels a great deal of sympathy and kinship with the far north, and that is Scotland. And it sometimes seems to me that, you know, the view of an outside person can actually really help clarify issues for those inside, and maybe that applies to the way Scots consider their own remote northern communities and what their experience might help bring to the table for Arctic communities across the far north. So, without further ado from me, please give a warm welcome to our first speaker this afternoon, Aileen Campbell, MSP, Member of the Scottish Parliament. She's the Scotland Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Local Government.
Thank you very much, and good dag. It is a pleasure to be with you at the Arctic Frontiers today, and it is timely because tomorrow, Shetland, our archipelago that sits as far north as Cape Farewell in Greenland, celebrates its annual Uphellia Viking Fire Festival, a very explicit and lively celebration of Shetland's and Scotland's long and intertwined historic links with Norway. And this gathering also comes just a couple of days after we celebrate the poetry and song of our national bard, Robert Burns. The poetry and songs that he penned spoke of love, fairness, and egalitarianism. But he also espoused an internationalist outlook that remains as crucial as ever for Scotland as we seek to continue to build new relationships with countries around the world and cement and celebrate old partnerships that have been integral to our story. Now, I mention Burns because those themes of fairness, of kindness, solidarity speak to the values that underpin our national performance framework. Our framework has been developed jointly by ourselves in national government, along with our partners in local government, and embraced by much of public life. It articulates the type of country that we want Scotland to be, a fairer country with opportunity for all. And it is important in helping us shift from judging the success of Scotland by GDP alone to instead also focusing on the well-being of our people. We join many of the countries represented here today in that well-being journey as we attempt to rebalance our economies for the betterment of the people we all care so much about, whether we are politicians, policymakers, or professionals. And that is why this gathering is so important. It provides a valuable opportunity to share ideas, to test new approaches and learn from one another, to work in partnership where our pooled endeavours can maximise our potential and help us unlock barriers and tackle common challenges. Now, Scotland's population is just over 5.4 million, similar to Norway, Finland and Denmark. Like Arctic nations, most of our landmass is classified as rural, as much as 98%. We have 96 inhabited islands, with local populations often in single figures. Indeed, with only 9 people per square kilometre, our Highlands and Islands region is one of the most sparsely populated areas of Europe. We have an ageing population and an economy that, while performing strongly, still sees too many young people struggle to thrive where they were born and raised. Scotland and the Arctic, therefore, have much in common when it comes to ensuring that, no matter how rural, all of our communities are resilient, successful, and have access to high-quality services. By working together and pooling our expertise, we can make sure that remote doesn't become a byword for marginal. And that's why last September we published Arctic Connections, Scotland's first Arctic policy framework. Our document puts communities at the heart of a renewed Scottish Arctic dialogue, celebrating the many existing links while highlighting opportunities for even greater cooperation. Scotland is eager to learn from our Arctic neighbours, and we also want to be an active contributor into developing approaches that help improve the resilience of our communities across the region. The Scottish Government's approach is to empower communities to take the lead in delivering local projects. We do that by providing funding and support and removing barriers, sometimes ourselves, which stand in the way of progress. Our place principle, which means being guided by the needs of the community and the place, asks that local partners, both private and public sector, cooperate to develop local solutions to local issues. Not doing things to folk, not assuming that we know best, but instead co-producing sustainable and more transformative positive outcomes. One example of successful community-led regeneration is the Isle of Egg on the Inner Hebrides. Before the community took ownership, Egg faced problems like high unemployment and poor access to services, which led to population decline. Egg had no mains electricity, poor housing, and no proper pier for ferries. The Heritage Trust, a group of local residents, became the island's owners 22 years ago. And since then, the island's population has increased by 60%. Egg runs its own housing association, and between 85% and 95% of its energy comes from renewable sources. But it's not only our rural and island communities that are leading the change. In one of our most deprived areas of Glasgow, the community and public agencies have created a partnership, the Clyde Gateway, to deliver improvements to housing, environment and employment opportunities. Clyde Gateway's approach to regeneration is successful because it acknowledges that the experts are the people who live there. So we want to see more of this, and it's clear that when we listen, work with and trust our communities, that incredible things can happen. But it also points to a need to shift the power balance of Scotland. And 20 years on from the establishment of that Parliament, it is right that we think about what next for governance in Scotland and further strengthen our approaches to community empowerment and right-to-buy schemes. Building resilience in our local communities, especially on islands and coastal areas, will also be critical in terms of preparing for the global threat of climate change. We want communities to drive solutions, so we created the Climate Challenge Fund in 2008. The fund has supported community-led organisations to run projects that reduce local carbon emissions, cut waste, grow local food, and lower energy use in homes and community buildings. So many of the shared challenges we faced, environmental, economic and demographic, require partnership working and cooperation. And that's why we in Scotland value this opportunity to continue that dialogue, that discourse and that discussion with our Arctic partners in order that we can emerge through those challenges in stronger positions and with successful communities. And that's why I'm also delighted to announce that later this year, Scotland will host Arctic Frontiers Abroad, which will help us further reflect on how we can increase our cooperation further. So Scotland looks forward to welcome you, and I look forward to continued working with you to make sure that our shared aspiration of successful and resilient places becomes the reality that we all seek. So thank you for letting us be part of this conference, and I look forward to the panel discussion and some of your questions. Thank you very much.
Aileen. Yeah, we'll be having you back very soon. But thank you very much. It's actually fascinating to hear the Scottish Government's commitment to its rural areas, to its people, both urban and rural, and also its definite desire to build links with the Arctic. Interesting, no mention at all of links with London, but that's another story for another day. We'll get to that later, maybe.